I'm Irie Halston, 22 years old. Until 3 weeks ago, I believed family meant showing up for each other's biggest moments. Then my college graduation changed everything. I walked across that stage to deliver my valedictorian speech, scanning the crowd for my father's proud face, only to find his empty seat staring back at me. His words still echo in my mind. Tyler got arrested again. I had to choose. What he didn't know was that I had been working 3 jobs to help pay for Tyler's previous legal fees for 2 years. I sacrificed my social life, my peace of mind, even skipped meals to contribute to the family crisis fund. But here's what makes this story even more unbelievable. The speech I gave that day wasn't just about academic achievement. It was about resilience, about rising above circumstances that try to define you. How could my own father miss the moment I proved everything I'd been trying to tell him about myself? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning of graduation, I woke up in my Chapel Hill apartment with the kind of nervous energy that feels like champagne bubbles in your chest. Sunlight streamed through the gauze curtains my roommate Ray had insisted on hanging, casting everything in a golden glow that made the day feel possible, important, sacred even. I reached for my phone, expecting the usual good luck text from extended family and professors. Instead, I found 17 missed calls from Maeve, my stepmother, and 1 text from Dad. Proud of you, kiddo. See you there. The simplicity of his message should have comforted me, but something felt off. In our family, brevity usually meant crisis was brewing somewhere just out of sight. I padded to the kitchen where Ray was already making coffee, her dark curls piled high in a messy bun that somehow looked intentional and elegant. She had this way of making everything look effortless while I overthought every detail. Big day, valedictorian, she said, grinning as she handed me a steaming mug with, nevertheless, she persisted, printed in bold letters. How are you feeling? Like I might throw up from nerves, but also like I could run a marathon. I admitted, inhaling the rich aroma of the Ethiopian blend we'd splurged on for special occasions. Ray studied my face with that sociology major intensity. That made her such a good friend and such an exhausting person to lie to. What's really going on in that brilliant head of yours? I traced the rim of my mug, searching for words that wouldn't sound pathetic. I just keep thinking about my mom. She would have been so proud today. She used to say education was the one thing no one could ever take away from you. And she was right, Ray said firmly. Speaking of people who should be proud, has your dad called? He texted, said he'd be there. I tried to keep my voice neutral, but Ray caught the uncertainty anyway. But I don't know. Something feels different lately. Like he's physically present, but emotionally somewhere else entirely. Even more than usual. Ray leaned against the counter, her expression softening. Irie, you know your dad loves you, right? Some people just aren't good at showing it in ways that feel like love to us. I nodded, but the knot in my stomach tightened. Anyway, my father's love had always felt conditional, like I had to earn it through perfect grades and invisible existence. Never needing too much, never causing problems, never asking for the kind of attention Tyler commanded through chaos. The apartment filled with the sounds of our morning routine, Ray singing off-key in the shower, the coffee maker gurgling its final drops, my phone buzzing with congratulatory messages from classmates and professors. Normal sounds that should have felt celebratory, but instead highlighted the strange hollowness I couldn't shake. I walked to my bedroom and opened the closet where my cap and gown hung like a black promise. Next to them, the dress I'd chosen. For the ceremony, a deep blue that my mother used to say brought out my eyes. I found it at a consignment shop downtown, spending more than I should have because it felt like something she would have picked for me. As I got ready, I thought about the speech folded neatly in my purse. I'd written and rewritten it 17 times, trying to find the balance between personal enough to be meaningful and universal enough to resonate. Professor Veiga had helped me workshop it, pushing me to dig deeper into what resilience actually meant. Don't just tell them about overcoming obstacles, she'd said during one of our sessions in her cluttered office. Show them how the obstacles shaped you into someone stronger. Make them understand that strength isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up with more wisdom than you had before. The speech was about finding your voice even when the world tries to quiet you. About pursuing excellence not for external validation, but for the satisfaction of knowing you pushed yourself to become who you were meant to be. About resilience being a choice you make every single day. I hadn't told anyone, not even Ray. About the deeper layer of the speech, how much of it was really about my father. About spending 14 years trying to prove I was worth his attention. About watching him pour endless energy into fixing Tyler while I fixed myself, quietly. And without recognition, by 10:30, I was dressed and ready. My hair pinned back in a style that felt sophisticated, but not trying too hard. Ray had left early to help with setup. She was graduating too, with a degree in sociology and plans to change the world through community organizing. I stood in front of my full-length mirror, practicing the opening lines of my speech one more time. Excellence isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up fully for your own life, even when showing up feels impossible. The words felt true, but saying them to my reflection made me wonder if I'd actually been showing up for my own life or just performing the version of myself I thought others wanted to see. My phone rang, breaking the spell of self-doubt. Dad's name appeared on the screen, and my heart did a little skip of relief. Double quotes. Hey, kiddo, ready for your big day? As ready as I'll ever be, I said, trying to match his casual tone. Are you and Maeve on your way? There was a pause that lasted half a second too long. About that. We're running a little behind, but we'll definitely be there. Wouldn't miss it for the world. Something in his voice felt rehearsed, like he was reading from a script. Is everything okay? Everything's fine. Tyler had a rough night, but Maeve's handling it. Focus on your speech and don't worry about us. We'll be the ones cheering loudest when they call your name. After we hung up, I tried to shake the feeling that something was shifting beneath the surface of our conversation. But this was my day, the culmination of 4 years of relentless work, and I wasn't going to let anxiety steal it from me. I grabbed my purse, checked my appearance one more time, and headed out into the bright Carolina morning. The campus was already buzzing with families gathering for photos, graduates in caps and gowns moving like a river of black fabric toward the ceremony venue, walking across campus. I let myself imagine my father's face when I delivered my speech. The pride in his eyes when they announced my summa cum laude distinction. The way he might finally see me not as the easy child who never needed attention, but as the daughter who had quietly become everything she'd set out to be. The image felt so real I could almost reach out and touch it. The ceremony was held in the Dean Smith Center, the same arena where I'd watched countless basketball games with my father during my freshman year. Back then, he'd made the drive from Asheville every few weeks, bringing sandwiches from my favorite deli and stories about his days as a volunteer firefighter. Those visits had felt like proof that distance couldn't diminish our connection. No. Sitting in the holding area with my fellow graduates, I scanned the program for my parents' names under Family of Irie Halston. The absence of their acknowledgement in print felt like foreshadowing, though I couldn't have said for what. Nervous? asked Marcus Chun, who was sitting next to me in alphabetical order. We'd been in several classes together over the years, and his steady presence had always been comforting. Terrified, I admitted, but also excited. You? Same. Though I think my parents are more nervous than I am. My mom's been crying since breakfast. He gestured toward the audience area. They got here 2 hours early to get good seats. I followed his gaze and spotted his family in the third row, his mother indeed dabbing at her eyes with a tissue while his father adjusted his camera equipment. The scene was so quintessentially Proud Family that it made my chest ache. "That's sweet," I said, and meant it as we lined up for the processional. I caught sight of Professor Vega in her academic regalia, the deep green hood of her doctoral degree contrasting beautifully with her dark skin. She caught my eye and mouthed, "You've got this," which sent a wave of calm through my nervous system. The processional music began, and we filed into the arena in measured steps. The space was massive, filled with thousands of people who had come to witness this transition from one phase of life to another. The energy was electric, proud, celebratory. I found myself searching the crowd as we walked, looking for familiar faces. I spotted Ray's family in the upper section, her mother waving enthusiastically despite being several dozen rows away. A few professors I recognized, classmates' families holding signs and flowers, but no sign of Dad or Maeve. They were probably just running late, I told myself. Traffic from Asheville could be unpredictable, and Tyler's rough night might have delayed their departure. There were still 30 minutes before the ceremony officially began. We took our seats on the arena floor, arranged in neat rows facing the stage, where the university's leadership sat in their ceremonial robes. The dean began his opening remarks, talking about tradition and transformation, about the responsibility that comes with education, about stepping into the world as leaders and change makers. I tried to focus on his words, but my attention kept drifting to the audience. During a pause for applause, I craned my neck again, scanning more systematically this time. Section by section, row by row. Looking for my father's gray hair and Maeve's floral prints. Nothing. My phone was tucked away in compliance with ceremony rules, so I couldn't check her messages. I forced myself to breathe deeply and pay attention as they began calling names for special recognition. Academic honors, leadership awards, research distinctions. When they announced the summa cum laude graduates, I stood with pride despite the growing anxiety. "This year's valedictorian," the dean announced, "has maintained a perfect grade point average while conducting groundbreaking research in social justice policy. Please welcome Irie Halston." The applause was thunderous as I walked to the podium, my legs steadier than I'd expected. The stage lights were bright, making it difficult to see individual faces in the audience, which was probably a blessing. I unfolded my speech and looked out at the sea of people. "Excellence isn't about being perfect," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "It's about showing up fully for your own life, even when showing up feels impossible." But words flowed from me with increasing confidence. I talked about resilience being a daily choice, about finding your voice in a world that tries to quiet you, about the responsibility that comes with education and privilege. I shared stories about late nights in the library, about professors who believed in me before I believed in myself, about the power of community and support. But underneath the words I was speaking, another voice was running a different script. "Where is he? Why isn't he here? What could be more important than this moment?" As I reached the conclusion of my speech, I said, "We stand here today not because we never fell, but because we learned to get back up with more wisdom than we had before. We are not defined by the obstacles we've faced, but by how we've chosen." to rise above them. The future belongs to those brave enough to claim it. The applause was overwhelming, a sound that should have filled every empty space in my heart. People were standing, cheering, and for a moment I felt the pure joy of accomplishment. But as the lights dimmed slightly and I could see the audience more clearly, my eyes went straight to the section where my family should have been sitting. Row K, seats 15 and 16. According to the tickets I mailed them weeks ago, empty, two folding chairs that might as well have been tombstones marking the death of something I've been carrying for years without realizing its weight. I walked back to my seat in a daze, accepting congratulations from classmates with a smile that felt painted on. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur of names being called, diplomas being handed out, tassels being moved from right to left. When they called my name, I walked across the stage again, shook hands with the dean, accepted my diploma, and smiled for the photographer. All the while, those empty chairs burned in my peripheral vision. After the ceremony, I was surrounded by well-wishers. Professor Vega hugged me tightly and whispered, "That speech was extraordinary. You're going to change the world, Irie." Classmates took selfies with me, their families treating me like a minor celebrity because I'd been the valedictorian. But every few minutes, I catch myself looking toward the exits, expecting to see my father rushing in with apologies and explanations. Maybe they'd gotten lost. Maybe there had been an accident. Maybe Tyler's situation had been more serious than Dad had let on. Ray found me near the academic regalia return table, where I was mechanically removing my cap and gown. "Irie," she called, jogging over with her own family in tow. That speech was incredible. I was crying. Mom was crying. Even Dad teared up a little. I forced a smile as her parents enveloped me in congratulations and hugs. They had always treated me like a second daughter, and their genuine pride was both comforting and heartbreaking. "Where are your folks?" Ray's mother asked, looking around. "We wanted to tell them how proud they must be. The single quotes read. I started, then stopped. The truth felt too raw to say out loud. "They got delayed. Tyler had some kind of emergency." Ray's expression shifted, her celebration dimming as she registered what I wasn't saying. She'd heard enough stories about Tyler's crises over the years to understand the pattern. "What kind of emergency?" she asked quietly. I shrugged, trying to appear casual. Dad didn't give details. Just said they were running late, but would definitely be here. We both looked around the arena, which was slowly emptying as families headed to restaurants and reception parties. No sign of my father's distinctive walk or Maeve's nervous energy. "Maybe they're waiting outside?" Ray suggested, but her voice lacked conviction. I pulled out my phone, which had been burning a hole in my consciousness for the past 2 hours. 17 new messages, but none from Dad. Texts from extended family, former professors, high school friends who'd watched the ceremony live stream. Congratulations and praise and love from everyone except the 2 people whose presence I needed most. I called my father's number. It went straight to voicemail. I called Maeve. Same thing. A hollow feeling spread through my chest, different from the nervous energy I'd felt that morning. This was the specific grief of being forgotten, of having your biggest moment become invisible. To the people you most wanted to see you. "Let's get some food," Ray said gently. "Maybe they'll call while we're at lunch." I nodded, but I already knew they wouldn't call. Not today. Whatever crisis Tyler had created this time had become more important than the culmination of 4 years of my life. More important than the speech I'd written partially for my father, hoping he'd finally understand who I'd become. As we walked out of the arena into the bright afternoon sun, I caught my reflection in the glass doors. I looked like someone who had just accomplished something remarkable, composed, successful, proud. But inside, I felt like that 8-year-old girl who lost her mother and never quite figured out how to be enough. For the parents she had left, the empty chairs weren't just about today, I realized. They were about every time I'd made myself smaller so Tyler could be bigger. Every time I'd succeeded quietly so my father could focus on putting out fires. Every time I convinced myself that being low maintenance was the same as being loved. Today, it was supposed to be about celebrating how far I'd come. Instead, it became the day I finally understood how alone I'd been all along. The lunch Ray's family took me to should have been celebratory. We went to Lantern, one of Chapel Hill's nicest restaurants, where her parents ordered champagne and made toast after toast to our accomplishments. I smiled and nodded and tried to participate, but every few minutes I found myself checking my phone. Nothing. Maybe their phones died, I suggested when Ray asked if I'd heard anything. You know, how Dad is with technology. That I knew that wasn't it. Dad might struggle with smartphone features, but he never missed a call that mattered to him. When Tyler got arrested the first time, Dad had answered on the first ring at 2 a.m. When Tyler crashed his car junior year, Dad had left work in the middle of a meeting. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. After lunch, I drove back to my apartment alone, despite Ray's family's invitation to join them for their celebration. I needed space to process what had happened, or more accurately, what hadn't happened. My apartment felt different when I walked in. The same furniture, the same decorations, but somehow everything looked smaller, like I was seeing it from a distance. The cap and gown I'd left on my bed that morning looked deflated, empty of the promise they'd held just hours before. Call my father again. Voicemail? I called Maeve. Voicemail. I sent a text to the family group chat we'd started when they got married. Hope everything is okay. Ceremony went well. Would love to hear from you. Read receipts showed the message had been seen. No response. The silence felt louder than any argument we'd ever had. At least arguments acknowledged my existence, my right to be upset. This was erasure. I changed out of my dress and into comfortable clothes, then sat on my couch with my laptop, intending to respond to the congratulatory emails that had been piling up. Instead, I found myself staring at the blank screen, trying to figure out how to feel proud of my accomplishments when the people I most wanted to share them with had chosen to be elsewhere. Around 4 o'clock, my phone finally rang. Dad's name appeared on the screen, and relief flooded through me despite everything. Hey, kiddo, he said, and I could immediately tell something was wrong. His voice had that flat, exhausted quality it got when Tyler was in serious trouble. Dad, where were you? I kept looking for you during the ceremony. I know, honey, and I'm sorry. Tyler got arrested last night for DUI, and we've been dealing with lawyers and bail bondsmen all day. I tried to make it work, but you missed my graduation for Tyler. The words came out sharper than I'd intended. It wasn't just any arrest, Irie. This is his 3rd offense. If we don't handle this exactly right, he could go to prison. Real prison, not just county jail. The familiar knot formed in my stomach, the one that always appeared when Tyler's chaos invaded our lives. So you chose to handle Tyler's mess instead of showing up for my biggest day? Don't make it sound like that. You know, it's not that simple, but it was that simple. When faced with a choice between Tyler's crisis and my celebration, he'd chosen Tyler again. Dad, I gave the valedictorian speech today. I graduated summa cum laude. This was the biggest moment of my academic career, and I'm proud of you. You know that. But Irie, you're strong. You're successful. You don't need me the way Tyler needs me right now. Those words hit like a physical blow. I don't need you. That's not what I meant. No, that's exactly what you meant. Because I've never gotten arrested or crashed cars or failed classes, you think I don't need my father to show up for me. Tyler could end up in prison, Irie. Your graduation was one day. This could affect the rest of his life. My graduation was a culmination of 4 years of my life. 4 years of working 3 jobs and staying up until dawn, studying and sacrificing. Everything to make you proud. But I guess none of that matters because Tyler decided to drive drunk. The silence stretched between us, filled with 14 years of this same dynamic playing out in smaller ways. Tyler's emergencies always trumped my achievements. His need for rescue always outweighed my need for recognition. Where is Tyler now? I asked finally. He's here. We got him out a few hours ago. Maeve's making dinner, trying to keep things calm. Of course Maeve was making dinner. Of course they were all together, dealing with the family crisis as a unit while I sat alone in my apartment, still wearing the congratulations text like armor that hadn't protected me from anything. I have to go, I said. Irie, don't hang up. Angry, let's talk about this. I'm not angry, Dad. I'm tired. I was bone deep, soul level tired in a way that 4 years of academic pressure had never made me feel. I hung up before he could respond. The apartment felt suffocating suddenly. Too small to contain everything I was feeling. I grabbed my keys and walked outside, needing movement, needing air, needing to be anywhere but in the space where I'd gotten ready that morning with such hope that I drove without destination, letting muscle memory guide me through Chapel Hills. Familiar streets, past the library where I'd spent countless hours, past the coffee shop where I'd written most of my senior thesis, past the building where Professor Vega's office was located. Almost without conscious decision, I found myself parking outside the sociology building. Professor Vega's car was still in the faculty lot, and I could see lights on in her third-floor office. I'd spent enough time there over the past year to recognize the warm glow of her desk lamp. I climbed the stairs slowly, my legs heavy with exhaustion and disappointment. Her door was open, and she was grading papers at her desk, still wearing her graduation regalia from earlier. Irie, she said, looking up with surprise and delight. What are you doing here? Shouldn't you be celebrating with your family? The question hit exactly where it hurt most. I must have made some expression because her smile faded immediately. Come in, she said gently. Close the door and tell me what's happened. Professor Vega had a gift for creating safe spaces. Her office was filled with plants and artwork from her travels, books stacked everywhere, and a small couch where countless students had sat to discuss everything from academic challenges to personal crises. I'd never been one of those students before, preferring to keep my struggles private, but today I couldn't maintain the facade. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I sank into the familiar chair across from our desk and told her everything. About the empty chairs, about Dad's choice, about Tyler's latest arrest, about feeling invisible in my own family for as long as I could remember. She listened without interrupting. Her dark eyes focused entirely on me with a kind of attention I'd been craving from my father for years. How long has this pattern been going on? She asked when I finished. Since Dad married Maeve when I was 14? Maybe longer, but that's when it became obvious. And you've never addressed it directly with your father? I shrugged. What would be the point? Tyler genuinely needs help. He's struggling with addiction, with impulse control, with making good decisions. My problems are. I searched for the right word, smaller. Professor Vega leaned back in her chair, studying me with that same intensity she brought to analyzing social systems and power structures. Irie, let me ask you something. If a friend came to you and told you this exact story, that her father had missed her valedictorian speech to deal with her stepbrother's legal problems, what would you tell her? The answer came immediately. I'd tell her that she deserved better, that her achievements mattered, that love shouldn't be conditional on how much chaos you create. And yet you're telling yourself a different story about your own situation because it's different when it's your family. When it's the only parent you have left, is it different? Or have you just been trained to believe your needs matter? Less than Tyler's crises? The question hung in the air between us, and I felt something shift inside my chest. A recognition that felt dangerous and necessary at the same time. I think, I said slowly, I've been afraid that if I ask for too much, I'll lose him completely. And how is that strategy working for you? I laughed, but it came out bitter. Well, I lost him anyway, just more slowly. Professor Vega reached across her desk and handed me a tissue I didn't realize I needed. Irie, you are one of the most remarkable students I've ever taught. Your research is groundbreaking, your insights are profound, and your dedication is extraordinary. You delivered. A speech today that moved hundreds of people to tears. You are not someone whose needs are smaller or less important. Then why does it feel like they are? Because you've been living in a system that rewards Tyler for being broken and punishes you for being whole. But systems can be changed, even family systems, especially when you stop participating in your own diminishment. I stayed in her office until the sun began to set, talking through 14 years of making myself smaller, quieter, less needy. Professor Vega helped me see patterns I'd been too close to recognize, and by the time I left, something fundamental had shifted in how I understood my own story. Driving home, I felt different. Not better exactly, but clearer. The hurt was still there, sharp and fresh. But underneath it was something that felt like determination. Back in my apartment, I looked at my phone one more time. Still no additional messages from Dad or Maeve. The family group chat showed my message from hours earlier. Read but unanswered. I started typing a new message, then deleted it, then started again. Finally, I wrote, I've been thinking about today, and I need you to understand something. Missing my graduation wasn't just missing an event. It was missing me. It was choosing Tyler's crisis over my achievement, and that choice tells me everything I need to know about where I stand in this family. I love you both, but I can't keep making myself smaller so Tyler can take up more space. I need some time to figure out what comes next. I read it 3 times before hitting send. This time when the read receipts appeared, I turned off my phone. 3 days passed without any response to my message. 3 days of checking my phone obsessively despite having turned off read receipts. Of jumping every time it rang, hoping it would be Dad calling to apologize, to explain, to acknowledge what his absence had meant. But the silence stretched on. And with each passing hour, I felt myself moving through stages of grief I hadn't expected. First shock, then anger, then a hollow kind of acceptance that felt worse than either of the first two. On Wednesday morning, I got a call from my grandmother, my mother's mother, who lived in a retirement community in Savannah and who I hadn't spoken to in months. Irie, honey. Her voice was warm and familiar, carrying that slight southern accent she'd never lost despite decades in various cities. I saw the video of your speech online. Your cousin Emma posted it on Facebook, and I must have watched it. 6 times. I'm so proud of you I could burst. The kindness in her voice almost undid me. Thank you, Grandma Rose. That means a lot. I called your father to congratulate him on raising such an extraordinary daughter, but when I asked him about the ceremony, he got all evasive. Said there had been some family complications. What kind of complications could keep a parent from their child's graduation? I found myself telling her the whole story, just as I had with Professor Vega. But where Professor Vega had offered academic analysis, Grandma Rose offered something different, family history. "Oh, honey," she sighed. When I finished, "This sounds just like your grandfather." "What do you mean?" "Your mother's father. He was a good man in many ways, but he had this pattern of pouring all his attention into whoever was struggling the most, thinking that's what love looked like. Your mother's brother David was always getting into trouble drinking, gambling, bad relationships, and your grandfather would drop everything to rescue him. Meanwhile, your mother, who was steadier and more responsible, got less and less of his time and attention. I never heard this story before. Mom had rarely talked about her childhood, and after she died, those stories had died with her. What happened? David never learned to stand on his own 2 feet because he never had to. And your mother ... Grandma Rose paused. Your mother spent years trying to prove she was worth her father's attention by being perfect. It took her a long time to understand that she couldn't earn love by being low maintenance. The parallels hit like a punch to the stomach. Did she ever talk to Grandpa about it? Eventually, yes. Not until she was in her 30s, mind you. But she finally told him how his choices had affected her. How being the easy child had made her feel invisible. It changed their relationship. Made it more honest. How? Well, it didn't fix everything overnight, but it stopped the pattern. Your grandfather started making more intentional choices about how he spent his time and energy. David had to learn to solve his own problems. And your mother got to have a relationship with her father based on who she actually was, not who she thought she needed to be. After we hung up, I sat with this new information, trying to decide what to do with it. The idea that this pattern had roots deeper than my own family was both comforting and disturbing. It meant I wasn't crazy for feeling hurt, but it also meant the pattern was likely to continue unless someone actively chose to break it. That afternoon, I decided to drive to Asheville. Not to confront anyone or demand apologies, but to collect some of my things from my childhood bedroom and to see the family dynamic with fresh eyes. The drive took 2 hours through winding mountain roads that had always felt like coming home. But today, they felt like traveling back in time to a version of myself I was trying to leave behind. Dad, and Maeve's house sat on a quiet street lined with oak trees, the kind of middle-class neighborhood where people knew each other's names and borrowed cups of sugar. It looked exactly the same as always, but I felt like a stranger approaching it. I used my key to let myself in, calling out a hello as I entered. The house smelled like Maeve's vanilla candles and whatever she was cooking for dinner, probably. Something comforting and elaborate because that was how she handled stress. "Irie?" Maeve's voice came from the kitchen, surprised and pleased. "We didn't know you were coming." I found her at the stove, stirring something that looked like beef stew. She gave me a hug that felt genuine but tentative, like she wasn't sure. If I was still angry, "Where's Dad?" I asked. "He ran to the hardware store with Tyler, some project they're working on in the garage." She turned back to the stove, her movements nervous. "How are you doing, honey? I know this week has been difficult." The careful way she phrased it, difficult, rather than devastating, told me everything I needed to know about how my absence had been discussed in this house. "I'm okay," I said. "Just came to get some things from my room." "Of course. Stay for dinner?" "I made your favorite." I looked at the stew, which was indeed my favorite, and felt a complicated mix of affection and frustration. Maeve showed love through food and careful attention to preferences, but she never learned to show love through advocacy or boundary setting. Maybe, I said. Depends on how the conversation goes. I went upstairs to my childhood bedroom, which Maeve had preserved exactly as I'd left it when I went to college. My high school trophies still lined the shelves. My honor roll certificates still covered one wall. My college acceptance letters still sat in a frame on the desk. Looking at it all, I realized how much of my identity had been built around achievement, around being the daughter who succeeded quietly and never caused problems. The room was like a shrine to being perfect, and suddenly I understood why coming home always felt suffocating. I was packing a few books and some jewelry that had belonged to my mother when I heard voices downstairs. Dad and Tyler had returned. Could hear Tyler's voice through the floorboards, animated and energetic as he told some story. Dad's laughter carried up the stairs, the kind of genuine amusement I couldn't remember him sharing with me in years. The contrast was stark and painful. With Tyler, Dad was engaged, present, emotionally available. With me, he was polite but distant, proud but detached. I finished packing and went downstairs, my bag over my shoulder in a way that made it clear I wasn't planning to stay long. Irie! Tyler jumped up from the kitchen table where he'd been sitting with Dad, beer bottles and what looked like blueprint drawings spread between them. I didn't know you were here. Congratulations on graduation. Dad showed me the video of your speech. It was really good. His enthusiasm seemed genuine, which somehow made everything more complicated. Tyler wasn't malicious. He wasn't trying to steal attention or hurt me. He was just a 19-year-old who made bad decisions and needed constant rescue, and he had no idea how his existence had shaped my entire relationship with our father. Thanks, I said. What are you guys working on? Dad's helping me build a workshop in the garage, Tyler said, his face lighting up. For woodworking. I think I want to try making furniture. Dad beamed at this announcement, and I felt something twist in my chest. When had he ever looked at me with that kind of pride for my interests? When had he ever devoted weekend time to supporting my passions? That sounds great, I managed. Irie, Dad said, his tone shifting to something more careful. Can we talk? We went to his study, a small room off the main hallway that had always been his sanctuary. The walls were covered with photographs from his firefighting days, commendations and awards, pictures of him with his crew. One small section held family. Photos including my high school graduation picture and a few shots from various holidays. I got your message, he said once we both sat down. And I've been thinking about what you said. I waited, giving him space to continue. You're right that I chose to handle Tyler's situation instead of coming to your graduation. But, Irie, you have to understand. Do I? I interrupted. Because I've been understanding for 8 years. I've been understanding every time Tyler's crisis became the family emergency. I've been understanding every time my achievements got overshadowed by his problems. I've been so understanding that I convinced myself it was normal. Dad looked uncomfortable, like he'd been hoping for a different conversation. Tyler is struggling, really struggling. And if I don't help him, then you have to learn to help himself, the way I did when Mom died. The way I did when I needed college funding. The way I did with everything important in my life. That's different. You're stronger than Tyler. No, Dad, I'm not stronger. I just learned earlier that I couldn't count on being rescued. The words hung between us, and I saw something flicker across his face that might have been recognition. I want to be here for you, he said finally. but I don't always know how. You're so capable, so independent. Tyler needs more obvious kinds of help. Tyler needs consequences. I needed my father at my graduation. We stared at each other across the desk that had been between us in various forms for years. Him offering logical explanations for emotional choices, me asking for something he didn't seem to know how to give. What do you want from me? He asked, and I heard real confusion in his voice. I want you to see that loving Tyler doesn't require neglecting me. I want you to understand that I've been making myself small for years so he could take up more space, and I'm tired of disappearing. I want you to miss me when I'm gone instead of just noticing when Tyler is. Dad was quiet for a long time, looking. Down at his hands, when he spoke again, his voice was softer. I do miss you. But you're always okay, Irie. You always figure things out. Because I had to. Because someone had to be okay in this family, and Tyler wasn't available for the job. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, circling around the same central issue. Dad couldn't see how his pattern of rescuing Tyler had effectively erased me. He acknowledged my hurt, but couldn't quite grasp the systemic nature of what had been happening. Finally, I stood up to leave. I love you, Dad, but I can't keep having the same relationship we've always had. Either we figure out how to change this dynamic, or I'm gonna have to step back from the family for a while. Step back how? I don't know yet, but I can't keep showing up for people who don't show up for me. I left that night without staying for dinner, driving back to Chapel Hill with more clarity than I'd had in weeks. The conversation hadn't solved anything, but it had helped me understand that the problem wasn't just my father's choices, it was my acceptance of those choices. For the first time in my life, I was considering what it might look like to stop. Accepting the unacceptable. 2 weeks after my visit to Asheville, I got a call that changed everything I thought I understood about my family's dynamics. I was at my apartment, finally starting to pack for the move to Durham, where I'd accepted a research position at Duke University, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Maeve's number, which was unusual. She rarely called me directly, preferring to communicate through Dad or in family group messages. Irie? Her voice sounded strange, strained in a way I'd never heard before. I need to talk to you about something. Are you free? Sure. What's going on? Not over the phone. Can you come to Asheville? Your father's at work and Tyler's at his. Community service, so it would just be us. The secrecy in her tone made my stomach clench. Is everything okay? Are you sick? Just ... please come. I'll explain everything when you get here. The drive to Asheville felt interminable, my imagination conjuring every possible scenario. Maeve had always been the family peacekeeper, the one who smoothed over conflicts and tried to keep everyone happy. For her to call a secret meeting meant something significant was happening. I found her in the kitchen when I arrived, sitting at the table with a manila folder in front of her and a cup of tea that had clearly gone cold hours ago. She looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that seemed to go deeper than simple fatigue. Thank you for coming, she said, gesturing for me to sit across from her. I've been trying to figure out how to have this conversation for weeks. You're scaring me, Maeve. What's going on? She opened the folder and pulled out a stack of papers that looked like medical bills. These are Tyler's therapy and treatment records from the past 3 years. I think you need to see them. I frowned, confused. Why would I need to see Tyler's medical information? Because I don't think you understand what we've been dealing with. What your father has been dealing with. She pushed the papers toward me. Tyler isn't just making bad choices. Irie. He's been in treatment for bipolar disorder and addiction since he was 16. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? We didn't tell you because Tyler didn't want anyone to know. He was embarrassed, afraid people would treat him differently. But his arrest, his impulsive behavior, the way he seems to cycle between being fine and creating chaos, it's not just teenage rebellion, it's mental illness. I stared at the papers in front of me, trying to process this information. Medical, bills for psychiatric hospitals, therapy sessions, medication management, intensive outpatient programs. Thousands and thousands of dollars over 3 years. This still doesn't excuse Dad missing my graduation, I said, but my voice lacked conviction. Doesn't it? Maeve leaned forward, her eyes intense. Irie, the night before your graduation, Tyler had a psychotic break. He was found by police on a bridge downtown at 2 a.m. talking about jumping. The DUI arrest happened when he was driving himself to the hospital because he was having suicidal thoughts, but got confused and disoriented. The room seemed to tilt around me. He was suicidal? Yes, and your father spent that entire night the next day in the psychiatric emergency room trying to get Tyler admitted for evaluation. We weren't dealing with a typical arrest situation. We were dealing with a mental health crisis that could have ended with Tyler dead. I felt like I was seeing my family's story through a completely different lens, and everything I thought I understood was shifting. Why didn't anyone tell me? Because Tyler made us promise not to. He was terrified you'd see him as crazy or broken. And honestly, because you were so focused on school and your own life, it felt easier to handle it. Quietly. Easier for who? For everyone. You had enough stress with graduation and job hunting. Tyler was already dealing with stigma and shame. Your father was trying to keep the family together while navigating a mental health system that's incredibly difficult to access. I looked through more of the papers, seeing dates that corresponded with times when Tyler had seemed fine to me, when I thought he was just being irresponsible or immature. Treatment plans, medication schedules, therapy notes that painted a picture of a teenager struggling with brain chemistry that betrayed him at every turn. The money, I said suddenly, remembering my contributions to the family crisis fund. I've been helping pay for his treatment. Yes, and your father didn't want you to know that either. He was embarrassed that he couldn't handle it financially on his own. So everyone has been lying to me for 3 years. Maeve's face crumpled slightly. We weren't lying exactly. We were just protecting everyone's privacy. Tyler's right too. Confidentiality, your right to focus on your studies without family drama, your father's pride about being able to provide for his family. And what about my right to understand what was happening in my own family? You're right, she said quietly. We should have told you. But Irie, you have to understand your father doesn't miss things because he doesn't care about you. He misses things because he's terrified Tyler will die if he doesn't stay vigilant. The weight of this new information settled on me like a heavy blanket. All the resentment I'd been carrying, all the anger about being overlooked and undervalued, suddenly felt more complicated. The night of graduation, I said slowly. When Tyler was arrested, he'd been off his medication for 2 weeks without telling anyone. The DUI was just the visible symptom of a much bigger crisis. Your father was literally choosing between your celebration and Tyler's survival. I put my head in my hands, feeling overwhelmed by the reframing of everything I thought. I knew. Why are you telling me this now? Because I watched your father cry for the first time in 8 years after you left that night. Because he's been carrying guilt about missing your graduation that's eating him alive. And because Tyler's been asking about you constantly, worried that he ruined your relationship with our family. He's worried about me? Irie, Tyler adores you. He talks about how proud he is to have such a smart, accomplished sister. He had no idea your father was missing important events for him until we told him about graduation. He was horrified. This information felt like puzzle pieces rearranging themselves into a completely different picture. Tyler wasn't the golden child stealing attention. He was a sick kid whose illness had hijacked the entire family's emotional resources. Where is he now? I asked. In an intensive outpatient program. 3 days a week, 4 hours a day. He's been stable for about 10 days, which is the longest stretch we've had in months. And Dad? Exhausted. Guilty. Missing you terribly, but convinced he made the only choice he could make. I sat in silence for several minutes, processing everything. Maeve had told me. The anger I'd been carrying felt different now, not gone, but redirected. I was still hurt that I'd been kept in the dark, still frustrated by my father's inability to communicate. But the narrative of deliberate neglect had been replaced by something more complex, a family struggling with illness and secrecy and impossible choices. I wish someone had told me, I said finally. I know. We were trying to protect everyone, but we ended up isolating you instead. I could have helped. I could have understood. Yes, you could have. And maybe we would have all handled things better if we'd been honest from the beginning. Maeve reached across the table and took my hand. Your father loves you desperately, Irie, but he's been operating in crisis mode for so long. He's forgotten how to show love that isn't crisis management. What happens now? That depends on you. And on whether you're willing to try rebuilding this relationship with new information. I looked at the medical bills spread across the table, each one representing a day when my family had been in pain while I'd been focused on my own life, unaware of their struggles. It felt like learning that there had been a war happening in the next room while I'd been studying for exams. I want to see Tyler, I said. Are you sure? Yes, it's time I understood what we've really been dealing with. Maeve smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. I think that would mean a lot to him and to your father. As she called Tyler to arrange a meeting, I realized that everything I believed about my family's dynamics had been based on incomplete information. The hurt was still real. The years of feeling invisible were still valid. But the reasons behind my father's choices were entirely different than I'd understood. This wasn't about Tyler being loved more than me. This was about Tyler being sick, and my father being terrified, and all of us trying to navigate something no one had prepared us for. It didn't excuse the secrecy or the lack of communication, but it reframed everything in a way that felt like possibility instead of finality. For the first time in weeks, I felt like there might be a path forward. Tyler and I met at a coffee shop in downtown Asheville 2 days later. Maeve had suggested neutral territory, somewhere public but not too crowded, where we could talk without the weight of family history pressing down on us from every piece of furniture. I arrived first and chose a corner table with good sight lines, a habit I developed over years of studying in public places. The shop was one of those deliberately quirky local spots with mismatched chairs and local art covering the walls, the kind of place that felt safe for difficult conversations. When Tyler walked in, I was struck by how different he looked. Not physically, he was still tall and lanky, with dark hair that never quite stayed where it was supposed to, but something in his demeanor had changed. He moved more carefully, more deliberately, like someone who was consciously managing his energy and impulses. "Hey," he said, sliding into the chair across from me. "Thanks for meeting me." "Of course." We ordered coffee and sat in awkward silence for a few minutes, both of us clearly unsure how to begin a conversation we'd never had before. In all the years we'd lived in the same house, We never really talked about anything deeper than homework or weekend plans. Maeve told me she showed you my medical stuff, Tyler said finally. Yeah, I had no idea what you've been dealing with. He nodded, looking down at his hands. I didn't want anyone to know, especially not you. Why especially? Not me? Because you're perfect, Irie. You get good grades, you make good choices, you have your life figured out. I didn't want you to know how messed up I am. The word perfect hit me like a slap. Tyler, I'm not perfect. No one is perfect. You seem perfect. You never get in trouble, never cause problems for Dad and Maeve. You're the kind of person I wish I could be. I stared at him, realizing we'd been seeing each other through completely distorted lenses. He saw me as effortlessly successful while I saw him as effortlessly loved. You want to know the truth about my perfect life? I said. I've spent the last 8 years convinced that Dad loved you more than me because you needed him more. I thought his attention was a finite resource, and you were using it all up. Tyler's eyes widened. What? No, that's not Dad talks about you constantly. How proud he is, how smart you are, how you're going to change the world. He does all the time. Sometimes I think he wishes you were his only kid so he wouldn't have to deal with my mess. We looked at each other across the small table, both of us realizing how wrong we'd been about each other's place in the family constellation. Tyler, can I ask you something? I said, what's it actually like, having bipolar disorder? He was quiet for a long time, stirring his coffee with unnecessary intensity. It's like having two different people living in your brain, and you never know which one is going to be in charge on any given day. Sometimes I feel invincible, like I can do anything, and that's when I make really bad choices because consequences feel impossible. Other times I feel like the world would be better off without me, and that's when I do dangerous things because I don't care if I get hurt. And the medication helps when I take it consistently, but sometimes I feel so normal that I convince myself I don't need it anymore. Or sometimes the side effects are so awful that I'd rather deal with the mood swings. It's complicated. Is that what happened before graduation? You stopped taking your medication? He nodded, looking ashamed. I'd been feeling really good for a few weeks. So I thought maybe I was better. I know how stupid that sounds. It doesn't sound stupid. It sounds human. The night I got arrested, I was having what my therapist calls a mixed episode. Feeling manic and depressed at the same time, which is basically a recipe for disaster. I couldn't sit still, couldn't stop my brain from racing, but everything felt hopeless and dark. I thought driving might help me feel better, but I couldn't think clearly enough to realize I shouldn't be driving. That sounds terrifying. It was. And when Dad got the call from the police, he dropped everything to come get me. I didn't even know it was your graduation weekend until later. Maeve said you were suicidal. Tyler's hands tightened around his coffee cup. Yeah. That's the part I'm most ashamed of. Not just because of what it did to Dad and Maeve, but because it meant I missed your big day. I've watched your speech video probably 50 times, and every time I think about how I should have been there cheering for you instead of creating another crisis. Tyler, you didn't choose to have a mental health crisis. No, but I chose to stop taking my medication. I chose to ignore the warning signs. I chose to get in a car when I wasn't thinking clearly. And I chose to be angry at Dad for 8 years, instead of trying to understand what our family was actually dealing with. We sat with that acknowledgement for a while, both of us grappling with the weight of choices and consequences and the messy complexity of family love. I have something for you, Tyler said eventually, pulling a folded piece of paper from his. jacket pocket. "I've been working on this in therapy." He handed me the paper, and I could see his handwriting covering both sides in careful, deliberate script. "It's an amends letter," he explained, "part of my treatment program. But I wanted you to have it even if you decide you don't want a relationship with me." I unfolded the letter and began to read. "Irie, I don't know if saying I'm sorry is enough for everything my illness has put our family through, but I need to try. I know that my mental health crises have taken Dad and Maeve's attention away from your achievements and milestones for years. I know that you've contributed money to help with my treatment costs, which means you've been paying for a problem you didn't even know existed. I know that your graduation day was supposed to be about celebrating you, and instead it became about rescuing me. I can't go back and change any of that. But I can tell you that I see it now, and I'm working every day to manage my illness better, so that it doesn't keep hurting the people I love. You have every right to be angry with me, with Dad, with our whole family situation. But I need you to know that you are the person I'm most proud to be related to. When I'm having a good day and feeling optimistic about the future, you're the example I look to. You've built an incredible life through your own hard work and intelligence. And you did it while our family was too distracted by my problems to give you the support you deserved. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope we can find a way to be real siblings instead of strangers living in the same house. I want to know about your dreams and your work and your life. I want to be someone you can count on instead of someone who constantly needs rescuing. I want Dad to be able to celebrate your successes without worrying about my next crisis. I'm getting better, slowly and with setbacks, but I'm learning to manage this illness instead of letting it manage me. I hope that means our family can heal too. I love you. Even though I haven't done a good job of showing it, Tyler, by the time I finished reading, there were tears in my eyes. Tyler, this is ... Is it too much? My therapist said I should be honest about the impact of my actions, but maybe it's too intense. No, it's perfect. It's exactly what I needed to hear. Really? Really? And Tyler, I need you to know that I don't blame you for being sick. I blame all of us for not figuring out how to talk to each other about what was happening. So where do we go from here? I thought about the question, feeling the weight of 8 years of misunderstanding and hurt, but also the possibility of building something new and honest. I think we start over, I said. I think we get to know each other as the people we actually are instead of the people we thought each other were. I'd like that. And I think we figure out how to help Dad understand that loving you doesn't require neglecting me, and supporting me doesn't mean giving up on you. Do you think that's possible? I think it has to be. Because I'm tired of this family operating in crisis mode, and you deserve to have an illness without it consuming everyone's entire existence. Tyler smiled for the first time since he'd sat down. Can I tell you something? Even though I know my problems have taken up too much space in this family, I've also felt really alone with this, like I was the only one dealing with it. You don't have to be alone with it anymore. But Tyler, you also have to stay in treatment. You have to take your medication. You have to do the work, not just for Dad and Maeve, but for yourself. I am. It's hard, but I'm learning that it's harder to keep cycling through crises than it is to just manage the illness consistently. Good, because I want my brother back, the real version, not the crisis version. You never had the real version before. Then I want to meet him for the first time. We stayed at the coffee shop for 2 more hours, talking about everything we'd never discussed before. Tyler told me about his therapy, his medication management, his plans for learning woodworking as a way to manage anxiety. I told him about my research, my job at Duke, my own struggles with perfectionism, and people pleasing Dot for the first time. We felt like siblings instead of competitors for our father's limited emotional resources, Dot, as we got ready to leave. Tyler said, "Will you help me talk to Dad about changing how our family handles things?" Yes, but Tyler, this conversation needs to happen even if it's uncomfortable. No more secrets, no more protecting people from information they need to have. Agreed. And Irie? Thank you for giving me a chance to explain. I wasn't sure you would. Thank you for being honest with me. Finally, walking to our cars, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Hope that our family could become a place where everyone's needs mattered, where crises didn't consume everything, where love didn't have to be rationed like a scarce resource. Conversation with Dad would be harder, but for the first time, Tyler and I would be having it together. Asterisk. The family meeting happened on a Saturday afternoon 3 days later. Dad had been hesitant when Tyler and I called him together, asking him to set aside time for what we described as an important conversation about how we function as a family. "Are you two ganging up on me?" he'd asked, and I could hear the defensiveness already creeping into his voice. "We're not ganging up on anyone," I'd said. "We're trying to figure out how to be a healthier family." I thought we were already working on that. "Dad, we need to talk, really talk. All of us together, with everything on the table." We met at the house, in the living room that had hosted so many tense conversations over the years. But this time felt different. Tyler and I sat together on the couch, presenting a united front that I don't think Dad had ever seen before. Maeve was there too, nervous and fidgety in her armchair, clearly hoping this wouldn't become another family explosion. She'd brought coffee and homemade cookies, as if the right snacks could prevent emotional upheaval. Dad sat across from us, his posture defensive despite his obvious efforts to appear relaxed. "So," he said, "what's this all about?" Tyler and I looked at each other, and I nodded for him to start. We'd planned this, deciding he should open since so much of the family dynamic had revolved around his illness. "Dad, I need to tell you something about my mental health treatment," Tyler began, "and about how it's affected our family." "Tyler, you don't need to." "Yes, I do. Because keeping secrets about my illness has hurt everyone, especially Irie." Dad's eyebrows rose slightly. He wasn't used to Tyler speaking so directly or taking responsibility so clearly. "I've been thinking a lot about family dynamics and therapy," Tyler continued, "and I realize that my mental health crises have created a pattern where I get all the attention even when it's negative attention. And Irie gets overlooked because she doesn't create emergencies." "That's not true," Dad said immediately. "I'm proud of everything Irie has accomplished." "Being proud isn't the same as being present," I said quietly. Dad turned to me, his expression shifting to something more guarded. "Irie, we've already talked about this." I explained about graduation. "Dad, this isn't just about graduation. It's about 8 years of feeling invisible in my own family." "You're not invisible." "Then tell me this," I said, pulling out my phone. "When was the last time you called me just to check in? Not because Tyler was in crisis, not because there was family news to share, but just because you wanted to talk to me." Dad opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. I could see him searching his memory and coming up empty. "When was the last time you asked about my research? My job plans, my friendships, my dating life, my dreams for the future? You never seemed like you wanted to talk about those things. I never seemed like I wanted to talk, or you never seemed like you had time to listen." The question hung in the air, and I watched my father's face as he grappled with it. Tyler jumped in. Dad, you know how you always say I need to take accountability for my actions? Well, I think we all need to take accountability for how we've been functioning as a family. What does that mean? It means admitting that my illness has hijacked everyone's emotional energy, Tyler said. It means acknowledging that Irie has been making herself smaller so I could take up more space. It means recognizing that love isn't supposed to be about crisis management. Dad looked genuinely confused. But if you're in crisis, of course that becomes the priority. That's what families do. Not every crisis is a real emergency, I said. And even when emergencies are real, they don't have to consume everything else in our lives. Tyler could have died, Dad said, his voice rising slightly. He was suicidal, Irie. How is that not a real emergency? It absolutely was a real emergency, I agreed. But Dad, Tyler has been having emergencies for 3 years. At some point, constant crisis management becomes a way of avoiding real relationship. What's that supposed to mean? Tyler answered, It means it's easier for you to rescue me than to have normal father-son conversations. It means my illness gives you a clear role to play, but you don't know how to relate to Irie because she doesn't need rescuing. Dad was quiet for a long moment, looking between Tyler and me like we were speaking a language he didn't understand. I love both of you, he said finally. We know you do, I said. But Dad, love isn't just a feeling, it's also behavior. It's choices about how you spend your time and attention. And for 8 years, almost all of your time and attention has gone to managing Tyler's illness, Tyler added, which meant Irie had to raise herself emotionally. That's not fair, Dad said, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? I asked. Dad, when Mom died, you were grieving and overwhelmed, and I understood that. But then when you married Maeve and Tyler came into our lives, I became the easy child who never needed anything. Do you know what that felt like? You were independent. You were capable. I was 8 years old when Mom died. I was 14 when you were married. I wasn't naturally independent. I learned to be independent because depending on you felt unsafe. The words came out harsher than I'd intended, but they were true. Dad flinched as if I'd slapped him. Unsafe how? Not physically unsafe, emotionally unsafe. Like if I needed too much or caused any problems, I might lose the only parent I had left. Dad's face went pale. Irie, I would never, you didn't mean to. But Dad, when Tyler had his first crisis and you dropped everything to handle it, what message do you think I received about whose needs mattered more? Tyler's needs were more urgent, but my needs disappeared entirely. Do you see the difference? Maeve spoke up for the first time. Colt, I think what they're trying to say is that we got into a pattern where Tyler's illness became our only focus, and everything else, including Irie's entire life, became background noise. Dad looked at his wife, then back at Tyler and me. So, what are you asking me to do? Ignore Tyler when he's in crisis? No, Tyler said firmly. I'm asking you to manage my illness without making it the center of the family universe. I'm asking you to support my treatment without making my mental health everyone's full-time job. And I'm asking you to see me as someone who deserves attention and care even when I'm not falling apart, I added. I want to understand, Dad said, slowly. But I don't know how to change patterns we've had for years. We start by being honest about what those patterns have cost all of us, I said. Tyler, tell Dad what you told me about feeling alone with your illness. Tyler took a deep breath. Dad, I know you've sacrificed everything to help me, but sometimes your constant worry and intervention makes me feel like I'm a problem to be solved instead of a person to be loved. I need support with my illness, but I also need to be allowed to grow up and take responsibility for managing it. Dad looked stricken. I was trying to keep you safe. I know. But you can't save me from my own brain chemistry. You can support my treatment and love me through the hard days, but you can't prevent every crisis. And trying to do that has exhausted all of us. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a photo I'd found while packing a picture from my 10th birthday, about a year after Dad and Maeve got married. We were all smiling, but if you looked closely, you could see the strain around Dad's eyes, the careful way Tyler and I were positioning ourselves on opposite sides of the frame. "Look at this picture," I said, handing him the phone. This was taken right after Tyler's first hospitalization. Look at our faces. Dad studied the photo, and I watched as recognition dawned. "We all look like we're trying too hard," he said quietly. "Because we were all trying to be what we thought the others needed instead of just being ourselves," I said. "Tyler was trying to be stable for you and Maeve. I was trying to be perfect so I wouldn't add to the stress. You were trying to fix everything, and Maeve was trying to keep everyone happy. Nobody was just being a family," Dad said, and his voice was softer than I'd heard it in years. "Exactly." We sat in silence for a few minutes, all of us absorbing the weight of 8 years of dysfunction disguised as love. "What do you want from me?" Dad asked finally. "What does changing this pattern actually look like?" Tyler and I had discussed this question extensively over the past few days. "We want family dinners that aren't crisis meetings," Tyler said. "We want conversations about normal things, work, school, hobbies, current events. We want you to ask about my life and actually listen to the answers," I added. "We want you to see my achievements as worthy of celebration, not just acknowledgement. We want Tyler's illness to be something our family manages, not something that manages our family," Tyler said. "And we want honesty. No more secrets about medical issues or financial stress or family problems," I said. "We're adults. We can handle difficult information." Dad was quiet for a long time, absorbing everything we'd said. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "I've been a terrible father." "No," Tyler and I said almost simultaneously. "You've been a father who didn't know how to handle an impossible situation," I said. "But Dad, now you do know. The question is whether you're willing to do things differently." "Of course I am, but I don't know how." "We figure it out together," Tyler said, "as a family, with honesty this time." Dad looked around the room at all of us, and for the first time in years, I saw something that looked like hope in his eyes. "I missed your graduation," he said to me, "and I can't go back and fix that. No, you can't. But you can show up for what comes next." "What comes next?" "Everything, Dad. My whole life. Tyler's recovery. Building relationships based on who we actually are instead of who we think we're supposed to be." Dad nodded slowly, and I could see him trying to wrap his mind around this new way of thinking about family. "I love you both so much," he said. "I'm sorry I've been so bad at showing it." "We love you too," Tyler said. "That's why we're having this conversation instead of just walking away." "So where do we start?" Dad asked. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. "We start with dinner. A normal family dinner where no one's in crisis and we just talk about our lives. Can we do that?" Dad asked, and he sounded almost scared. "We're about to find out," I said. 6 months later, I was walking across another stage in another cap and gown, this time to receive my master's degree from Duke University. But Everything about this graduation felt different from the last one. This time, when I looked out into the audience, I saw 3 familiar faces in the 4th row. Dad, Maeve, and Tyler, all beaming with pride. Dad was holding a professional-looking camera that Tyler had apparently taught him how to use. And Maeve was clutching a bouquet of sunflowers, my favorite flowers. A detail she'd remembered from a conversation we'd had months earlier. Tyler was wearing a button-down shirt and looked healthier than I'd seen him in years. He'd been stable on his medication for 4 months now, attending therapy regularly, and had started a part-time job at a local furniture restoration shop. More importantly, he'd learned to talk about his illness as something he managed rather than something that defined him. The family meetings we'd instituted after our big conversation had been awkward at first, sometimes tense, but gradually we'd found our rhythm. Every 2 weeks we'd gather for dinner and an honest conversation about how everyone was doing. Tyler would update us on his treatment progress. Dad would share what was happening at work. Maeve would talk about her book club and garden, and I would tell them about my research and my life in Durham it had taken. Dad a while to learn how to ask questions about my life that weren't purely factual. How are your classes? Had slowly evolved into, what are you discovering in your research that excites you? And how are you feeling about your future plans? The conversations still felt stilted sometimes, but they were real in a way our interactions had never been before. After the ceremony, we met at a restaurant Tyler had chosen, a small farm-to-table place that specialized in locally sourced ingredients. He'd become interested in sustainability and environmental issues as part of his recovery process, and Dad had started following his recommendations for restaurants and grocery stores. "I'm so proud of you," Dad said once we ordered, and I could hear that he was trying to make the words carry more weight than they had in the past. "Your research on criminal justice reform, I read the paper you published, and I kept thinking about how your mother would be amazed by what you're accomplishing." It was the first time he mentioned Mom in the context of my achievements, and it meant more than I could articulate. "Thank you for being here," I said. "All of you. It means everything." "Wouldn't miss it," Tyler said, and he meant it. "Besides, someone in this family needs to be successful enough to take care of all of us when we're old and decrepit." "I think you're underestimating your own potential," I said, grinning at him. "That coffee table you made is better than anything I could buy in a store." Tyler had surprised everyone by developing a real talent for woodworking. His therapist had suggested he try working with his hands as a way to manage anxiety, and it had turned out to be both therapeutic and potentially lucrative. He was talking about applying for a formal apprenticeship program in the fall. "Speaking of success," Maeve said, "Tyler got accepted into that furniture-making program at the community college." "Really?" I turned to my stepbrother, genuinely excited. "Tyler, that's fantastic." "It's just community college," he said, but he was smiling. "It's exactly what you want to be doing," Dad said firmly. "That matters more than where you're doing it." I watched the interaction between Dad and Tyler, noting how different their dynamic had become. Dad was learning to support Tyler's goals without trying to manage every aspect of his life, and Tyler was learning to accept encouragement without interpreting it as pressure. "Actually," Tyler said, looking slightly nervous, "I have something I want to tell everyone." We all turned our attention to him, and I felt the familiar family clench of anxiety, but Tyler looked calm, deliberate. "I'm thinking about moving out. Not far, just into my own apartment. My therapist thinks it would be good for my independence, and I've been stable long enough that I feel ready." I waited for Dad to panic, to list all the reasons why Tyler wasn't ready, to suggest modifications to the plan that would keep Tyler closer to home. Instead, Dad was quiet for a moment, clearly processing. How are you feeling about that? Dad asked finally, scared but excited. Like it's time. Do you have a plan for managing your medication and therapy appointments? Yes. Dr. Martinez and I have been working on a system for independent living. I'll still see her weekly and I'll still come to family dinners, but I'll be managing my daily routine on my own. Dad nodded slowly. What do you need from us to make that work? I almost gasped. 6 months ago, Dad would have immediately launched into crisis management mode, trying to control every variable to prevent Tyler from struggling. Now he was asking how to support Tyler's autonomy. Just patience if I mess up sometimes, and trust that I'll ask for help if I need it. You've got both, Dad said, and I could see how much effort it was taking him to choose support over control. After dinner, we walked around downtown Durham, and I found myself thinking about how different this family felt from the one I'd grown up in. We weren't perfect. Tyler still had bad days. Dad still struggled with anxiety about everyone's well-being. Maeve still tried to smooth over conflicts before they could develop into productive conversations. And I still had a tendency to withdraw when things felt too emotionally intense. But we were honest now. We talked about problems before they became crises. We celebrated achievements without them being overshadowed by emergencies. We'd learned to love each other as the people we actually were instead of the people we thought we should be. Irie, Dad said as we reached my car, I want you to know that I've been thinking about what you said about showing up for your life. Yeah, I realize I don't know much about your actual daily life. Your friends, your interests outside of work. What makes you happy? I'd like to change that. I'd like that too. Maybe I could visit sometime? Not for a special occasion, just to see where you live and meet the people who are important to you. It was such a simple request, but it represented a fundamental shift in how Dad understood parenting. He was asking to know me as a person, not just to celebrate my achievements. I would love that, I said as I drove back to Durham that night. I thought about the letter Tyler had written to me months earlier about wanting to be siblings instead of strangers. We'd achieved that, but we'd achieved something bigger too. We'd become a family that could handle both crisis and calm, that could support individual growth without sacrificing collective care. My phone buzzed with a text from Dad. Thank you for fighting for our family instead of giving up on us. I'm still learning, but I'm committed to doing better. I texted back. We're all still learning. That's what makes us human. 3 weeks later, Dad did visit Durham. He met my colleagues, saw my apartment, took me to lunch at a restaurant I'd mentioned liking. We spent 2 hours at a coffee shop talking about my research, his retirement plans, his memories of Mom, and his hopes for Tyler's future. It was the first conversation I could remember having with my father that felt like it was about building a relationship rather than maintaining one. When he left, he hugged me goodbye and said, I'm proud of who you are, not just what you've accomplished. It was exactly what I needed to hear for my entire life. 6 months after that, Tyler moved into his own apartment and hosted our first family dinner at his place. He made lasagna from scratch and was so nervous about how it would turn out that he called me 3 times during the cooking process for reassurance. The lasagna was delicious, but more importantly, Tyler was glowing with pride at having successfully hosted his family. He decorated his small apartment with furniture he'd made himself, and everything reflected his emerging sense of personal style and independence. This feels like a new tradition, Maeve said as we sat around Tyler's small dining table. What do you mean? Tyler asked. I mean, we used to only gather for crises or obligations. Now we're gathering because we enjoy each other's company. She was right. Our family dinners had evolved from duty to genuine pleasure, and our conversations had deepened beyond logistics and crisis management to include dreams, ideas, and the Small details that make up a life. A year later, I got a call that Dad had been in a minor car accident, nothing serious, just a fender bender, but he was shaken up. In the past, this would have become a family emergency that consumed everyone's attention for days. Instead, Tyler and I coordinated to make sure Dad got home safely. Maeve handled the insurance paperwork, and by the next day, it was just a story Dad told at dinner about the teenager who rear-ended him while texting. You know what I realized? Dad said during that dinner. I used to think that being a good father meant protecting you both from ever experiencing difficulty. Now I understand that being a good father means supporting you through difficulties while trusting you to handle them. It was a simple insight, but it represented years of growth and learning for all of us. Tyler had been stable for over a year by then, living independently while maintaining his treatment routine. He'd completed his furniture-making program and was considering starting his own small business. More importantly, he'd learned to talk about his illness openly, advocating for mental health awareness in his community and helping other young people navigate treatment. I finished my master's degree and started a PhD program, focusing my research on family systems and crisis intervention. My personal experience had given me insights that enhanced my academic work, and I'd started speaking at conferences about the importance of treating mental illness within family contexts rather than in isolation. Our family had learned that love isn't about rescuing each other, it's about supporting each other's growth while maintaining healthy boundaries. We'd learned that crisis doesn't have to consume everything else in life, and that celebrating achievements is just as important as managing problems. Most importantly, we'd learned that honesty is harder than secrecy in the short term, but it's the only foundation for authentic relationship. The last family photo I have from that year shows all four of us at Tyler's apartment for Thanksgiving dinner. We're laughing at something Tyler said, and everyone looks relaxed and genuine. Dad has his arm around me, and Tyler and Maeve are making faces at the camera. We look like what we'd become, a family that had survived crisis and learned to thrive in calm. A family that had fought for each other instead of giving up. A family that had chosen growth over comfort and honesty over peace. We look like people who know each other and genuinely enjoy each other's company. We look like home. 6 months had passed since that conversation in our living room. The one that peeled back 8 years of silence and misunderstanding like old wallpaper. Our family hadn't magically transformed into some perfect sitcom cast. We were still messy. But we were finally honest. Dad and I talked once a week. Sometimes it was awkward. Sometimes it was beautiful. He'd started sending me news articles about women in academia, asking questions about my work without turning it into a lecture. There was still a part of him that operated in fix-it mode, but I'd learned to gently reroute it into listen first mode. Sometimes it even worked. Tyler moved into a small one-bedroom unit on the edge of Asheville. His kitchen was constantly messy and his furniture mismatched, but it was his. He called it the experiment, and every time he survived a depressive dip or handled an anxious spiral without falling apart, he texted me, "Experiment holding." I'm okay today. We all went to his end-of-program showcase, where he displayed a hand-carved bookshelf and a cedar coffee table, and for the first time, Dad didn't introduce me as the one who went to Duke. He said, "This is Irie. She's Tyler's sister." 2 days before Christmas, I got a letter in the mail addressed in my grandmother's handwriting. Inside was a single envelope, yellowed with age, and a note that said, "I think you're ready to read this now." The envelope had my mother's name on it. It was a letter she'd written to me for my 21st birthday, meant to be given to me if something ever happened. Grandma Rose had waited an extra year, maybe because she knew how much growing up I still had left to do. I sat at my desk and Durham, trembling as I unfolded the paper. My sweet Irie, if you're reading this, then I didn't get the chance to see the woman you've become. And I hate that. But if I know anything, it's that you were born to rise. You've always had this quiet strength that could carry rivers if it had to, and I know you've had to. I hope your father has been there for you, and if he hasn't, I hope you've learned how to speak up for what you deserve. Life isn't fair, but fairness is not the measure of your worth. You are not remarkable because you've survived hard things. You're remarkable because you've remained gentle, curious, and kind in spite of them. Don't confuse being low maintenance with being lovable. You don't earn love by disappearing. Speak. Take up space. Fall in love with your own life. I love you more than this letter can say. Mom, I pressed the letter to my heart and cried harder than I had since graduation. Not because I was grieving, but because I finally understood something. I wasn't invisible. I just never demanded. To be seen. The new year brought surprises. Tyler relapsed. Not catastrophically, but enough to miss work and forget appointments and text me at 2 a.m. saying, I'm scared. Please don't give up on me. I did in single quotes T. instead. I drove to Asheville and sat with him while he shook and cried and cursed his own brain chemistry. We made tea and reviewed his crisis plan and watched terrible reality TV until the sun rose. Do you think I'll ever be normal? He asked. I didn't flinch. Double quotes, no. But I think you'll be your normal. And I think you'll get better at living with that. He nodded. That's weirdly hopeful. That's kind of my thing now. Later that week, he made a list of people to call when he started spiraling again. I was number 2. Maeve was number 1. Dad was number 3. He called us team. Tyler, we laughed about it, but something about naming it made it easier to live with Dad, and I took a road trip that spring. He offered to help me move some of my things from Chapel Hill to a new apartment in Durham. The drive started tense small talk and radio chatter, but by the time we hit the halfway mark, he turned the volume down and said, I need to say something. I braced. I'm sorry I wasn't there at your graduation. And not just that, I'm sorry I spent so many years showing up for the fire instead of the foundation. You were the foundation, Irie. You held this family together while I chased sirens. I looked at him for a long moment before replying. I know you didn't mean to hurt me, but your intentions don't cancel out the impact. He nodded. I've been reading about that. Intent versus impact. It's uncomfortable. Yeah, but it's true. He glanced at me as we passed the sign for Durham. Do you forgive me? I'm working on it. That was the truth. Forgiveness wasn't a single act. It was a daily decision to release resentment and choose honesty over silence. And some days I made that choice with grace. Other days I made it with gritted teeth. But I kept choosing. On the 1-year anniversary of my college graduation, I hosted a dinner in Durham. Tyler came with a vegan dessert he'd made himself. Dad brought wine and a camera he insisted on using despite not knowing how to focus it. Maeve wore earrings I'd given her for her birthday and gave everyone personalized place cards. After dinner, we walked through Duke Gardens. The flowers were blooming wildly, without permission or restraint. And something about that made me smile. This is my favorite time of year, I said. Because of the flowers? Tyler asked. Double quotes, no. Because it's the time when everything. That look dead starts showing signs of life again. I looked at my family flawed, mending, learning, and I felt something settle in me. This was what healing looked like. Not perfection. Presence. Not. Control. Connection. Not silence. Storytelling. My name is Irie Halston. I graduated top of my class. My dad missed that moment, but He's showing up for the ones that followed. And I'm still writing this story. Only now, I know I'm the main character. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting. For you, just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.